There is something I need you to pay very close attention to, because what begins today has the power to reshape the emotional foundation of your relationships in ways that may surprise you. This is not one of those passing astrological moments that creates a brief emotional wave before disappearing. Today, on August 6th, Venus, the celestial force associated with love, attraction, harmony, affection, and the way human hearts seek connection, moves into Libra. That detail alone deserves your attention, because Libra is not simply another zodiac sign on Venus's journey. Libra is one of the signs Venus governs, a place where its qualities are expressed with remarkable clarity and strength. When Venus arrives here, it is no longer adapting to unfamiliar territory. It is standing on familiar ground, operating with confidence, precision, and purpose. Because of that, the emotional patterns you have accepted as normal inside your relationships are preparing to undergo a profound transformation. I'm not saying this to create unnecessary suspense. I am saying it because the sequence of planetary movements unfolding throughout this month creates an unusually powerful emotional landscape. Within only a few weeks, Venus will form direct tension with Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and Saturn, four planetary influences that each represent deep change in completely different ways. Together, they create a rare atmosphere where love can no longer hide behind old habits or comforting illusions. At the same time, the entire period is framed between a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse, adding even greater significance to everything that unfolds. It is almost as though the universe has arranged an emotional passage that begins with one doorway and ends with another, inviting every relationship to reveal what is genuine and what has only been surviving through routine. While studying these alignments, however, one moment captured my attention more than any other. Around August 21st, there is a specific planetary movement that I believe will become a defining turning point for countless relationships. It carries the potential to reveal whether a partnership has the strength to evolve or whether it has quietly reached its natural conclusion. Surprisingly, very few people are discussing this particular transit, even though it may become the emotional climax of the entire month. We will explore that moment later because it deserves careful attention. But before we arrive there, it is essential to understand the sequence that leads toward it. There are 5 meaningful emotional shifts unfolding throughout this month, and the very first begins the instant Venus steps across the threshold into Libra today. The first change is something many people have unknowingly been carrying for far too long, and once this energy activates, continuing to ignore it may become impossible. The habit of giving too much without receiving enough is about to feel heavier than it ever has before. To understand why, we need to look back at the emotional atmosphere of the previous weeks. Venus has been traveling through Virgo, and Virgo expresses love through acts of service, practical support, reliability, and constant effort. It encourages people to demonstrate affection by helping, solving problems, anticipating needs, fixing situations before anyone asks, and becoming indispensable inside the lives of those they care about. At first glance, those qualities seem admirable. After all, generosity, dependability, and kindness are often celebrated as signs of a healthy relationship. Yet every beautiful quality carries a shadow when it loses balance. When someone remains in that pattern for too long, affection slowly transforms into responsibility, and connection begins to resemble an unspoken contract instead of an open exchange between two hearts. You continue giving your energy. You continue making sacrifices. You continue adjusting your own needs to preserve harmony. Gradually, without even noticing it, you stop asking an important question. Is the love flowing in both directions, or am I the only one carrying its weight? Many people never pause long enough to ask themselves that question because somewhere in their past, they learned that being needed was the safest way to secure love. They learned to believe that if they remained useful enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, supportive enough, they would earn their place in someone else's life. If any part of that sounds painfully familiar, then I want you to stay with this message, because the energy arriving today refuses to let that pattern continue unnoticed. Once Venus enters Libra, the emotional rules begin to change completely. Libra does not encourage endless self-sacrifice without recognition. Libra is symbolized by the scales because its deepest purpose is balance, fairness, reciprocity, and mutual respect. Under this influence, you become increasingly sensitive to emotional inequality. You begin noticing every conversation where your effort outweighs theirs. You recognize every situation where your kindness has become expected rather than appreciated. You become aware of every relationship where your emotional investment has quietly exceeded what is being returned. This awareness is unlikely to arrive as a gentle thought. Instead, it may feel surprisingly immediate, almost physical, as though your entire body suddenly recognizes an imbalance your mind has been trying to overlook. Please understand something important when that happens. Feeling uncomfortable with unequal relationships does not make you selfish. It does not mean you have become demanding, difficult, or ungrateful. It may simply mean the universe is restoring your understanding of what healthy love actually feels like. For those who have spent years protecting everyone else's comfort while ignoring their own emotions, this transit may become especially significant. If you are someone who keeps the peace at any cost, who smiles while carrying disappointment, who repeatedly says everything is fine simply to avoid conflict, even when your heart knows otherwise, maintaining that silence is about to become extraordinarily difficult. An inner voice that has remained quiet for far too long may suddenly become impossible to ignore. You may feel an overwhelming desire to express needs you have hidden, to revisit conversations you previously avoided, or to finally say that the current balance no longer reflects what your heart truly deserves. That impulse is not arriving to destroy your relationships. It is arriving to give them an opportunity to become more honest. The love that is trying to enter your life during this season cannot fully settle into a space already crowded with one-sided expectations and endless emotional obligations. Something must change before something healthier can grow. As that realization deepens, another discovery naturally follows. Once you clearly recognize where balance has been missing, you begin asking an even more revealing question. Why do the same kinds of people continue appearing in your life? Why do similar emotional patterns keep repeating themselves, no matter how different each relationship initially seems? That realization leads directly into the second transformation of this month, and it became impossible for me to ignore once I saw how the timing unfolded. On August 7th, only one day after Venus enters Libra, Venus immediately encounters a tense aspect with Chiron, opening the next chapter of this emotional journey. There is one part of this story that cannot be ignored, because it explains why so many people repeat the same relationship experiences without ever understanding what is truly pulling the strings beneath the surface. The next movement in the sky is not simply another planetary interaction. It is an invitation to face something that has quietly influenced your choices for much longer than you may realize. On August 7th, Venus encounters Chiron, a celestial body. Astrologers often describe as the wounded healer. Chiron represents the emotional injuries that remain hidden beneath everyday awareness, the insecurities that quietly shape your reactions, the old pain that lingers beneath your confidence, and the deeply rooted beliefs you carry without recognizing how strongly they continue directing your relationships. The connection formed between Venus and Chiron on this day is known as a quincunx. Unlike aspects that naturally blend two planetary energies together, a quincunx creates discomfort. It places two completely different forces into conversation, even though they speak entirely different emotional languages. There is no graceful compromise. There is no effortless harmony. Instead, the tension builds until something you have avoided can no longer remain invisible. That is exactly why this transit matters so much. It has a way of exposing the emotional habit that has been operating behind the scenes without your permission. For many people, I believe that hidden habit revolves around becoming the rescuer. Perhaps you have noticed yourself repeatedly feeling drawn toward people carrying emotional burdens, people struggling through difficult chapters, people who appear fragile, lost, wounded, or in need of support. Without thinking twice, you naturally become the dependable one. You become the listener, the encourager, the problem solver, the person willing to sacrifice your own energy to keep someone else standing. At first, that role may even feel meaningful because being needed creates the comforting illusion that your presence has undeniable value. There is a certain emotional satisfaction in believing you are the one capable of holding everything together when another person cannot. Yet beneath that generosity, there may be another story unfolding, one that receives far less attention than it deserves. The impulse to rescue someone else is not always about their healing. Sometimes it quietly protects you from looking directly at your own unresolved pain. As long as your attention remains focused on repairing another person's life, your own emotional wounds stay safely in the background. As long as you continue wearing the identity of the healer, you rarely have to acknowledge the places inside yourself that still ache. Without realizing it, helping others can become a way of avoiding your own vulnerability. It can become a subtle strategy for maintaining emotional control, because if everyone depends on you, then you never have to risk revealing the parts of yourself that also long for comfort, reassurance, and unconditional acceptance. That hidden dynamic is exactly what this Venus and Chiron quincunx has the potential to illuminate. Around August the 7th, many people may suddenly experience an uncomfortable awareness rising to the surface. There can be a growing conflict between the image of harmony you have worked so hard to maintain and the emotional truth quietly waiting underneath it. From the outside, everything may appear stable. The relationship may even seem successful by every visible standard. Yet beneath that appearance lives an unresolved wound that has been asking for attention all along. For some, that wound centers around self-worth. For others, it may be the deeply ingrained belief that love must always be earned through usefulness, sacrifice, or endless giving. For still others, the origin reaches even further back into experiences that shape their earliest understanding of affection, safety, and belonging. None of these realizations are especially comfortable. In fact, this transit may feel emotionally demanding precisely because it removes the protective distance that once made those wounds easier to ignore. Even so, I believe this becomes one of the most meaningful healing opportunities offered throughout the entire month. Lasting transformation can only begin after the hidden pattern becomes visible. No one can release an emotional cycle they cannot recognize. That is why the discomfort of this moment serves a purpose. It shines light directly onto the place where your relationships have been repeating themselves. It reveals the emotional script that has quietly been directing your choices. If you have recently felt emotionally depleted, if you have carried the constant sensation that you are supporting someone else's inner world while your own needs remain unanswered, this transit may finally explain why. The exhaustion is not necessarily the result of loving too little. It may be the consequence of carrying responsibilities that never truly belong to you. You may discover that you have invested enormous energy trying to complete another person's healing journey while postponing your own. Recognizing that truth may sting at first, yet within that realization lives the beginning of genuine recovery. Healing starts the moment your energy returns to the place where it has always belonged, your own heart. Once that awakening begins, however, the emotional intensity of the month accelerates dramatically. Everything we have discussed so far prepares you for what unfolds during the middle of August, because this next chapter has the potential to challenge nearly every assumption you have been holding about love itself. The period stretching from August 10th to August 12th stands out as one of the most significant emotional windows of the entire year. It carries extraordinary potential for profound connection, but it also introduces a level of instability that few people will expect. The reason becomes clear once you examine the sequence of planetary movements unfolding across only a very short period of time. On August the 10th, Venus forms a harmonious trine with Pluto. Only 4 hours later, Venus moves directly into an opposition with Neptune. Then, on the following day, Venus completes another trine, this time with Uranus, all while the energy of a solar eclipse in Leo continues building toward its peak. Each of these alignments contributes something essential to the larger story, and together they create an emotional landscape unlike anything simple or predictable. The trine between Venus and Pluto opens the door to extraordinary emotional depth. Superficial conversations begin giving way to honesty that reaches beneath appearances. Connections may suddenly feel more magnetic, more intimate, and more psychologically revealing than they have before. It becomes easier to recognize the hidden dimensions within another person, as though you are sensing layers that previously remained invisible. Existing relationships may enter conversations capable of changing their entire emotional foundation. Long-protected truths may finally be spoken. Emotional defenses that have stood for years may gradually dissolve. Matters quietly developing beneath the surface can finally emerge into the open, not for the purpose of destruction, but to create genuine transformation. For those who are single, this transit may introduce an encounter that reaches far beyond ordinary attraction. Rather than creating only excitement or temporary chemistry, someone may appear whose presence awakens parts of your identity that you never realized were waiting to be discovered. Pluto rarely concerns itself with casual experiences. It seeks honesty, depth, and irreversible change. Yet almost immediately after Pluto reveals what has been hidden, the atmosphere shifts again. Only a few hours later, Venus stands opposite Neptune, the planet associated with illusion, fantasy, imagination, and idealization. The emotional clarity Pluto has just uncovered now encounters Neptune's powerful mist. After one influence strips away appearances and exposes raw emotional truth, the next attempts to wrap that same truth inside uncertainty once again, inviting you to question whether what you have just seen is real or simply another beautiful illusion waiting to be believed. Neptune speaks to the part of the human heart that longs to believe every beautiful possibility before it accepts an uncomfortable reality. It is the quiet voice that encourages you to see potential where evidence may be lacking, to imagine who someone could eventually become instead of fully acknowledging who they are in this present moment. It nurtures dreams, hope, imagination, and idealization. But when its influence becomes too strong, it can blur the line between truth and wishful thinking. Because Venus and Neptune stand in opposition during this period, those two emotional forces begin pulling your awareness in completely different directions. One side urges you to embrace what has finally been revealed, while the other gently tempts you back toward familiar fantasies that once felt emotionally safer. That is why I believe many people will experience an extraordinarily powerful sequence of emotional events throughout this brief window. There may be one unforgettable moment when everything suddenly becomes unmistakably clear. Without warning, you may look at your relationship with fresh eyes and recognize it exactly as it exists, free from every comforting story you have been telling yourself. The emotional patterns become obvious. The unspoken imbalance becomes impossible to overlook. The truths you have quietly sensed for months, perhaps even years, finally stand directly in front of you without disguise. Yet almost as quickly as that clarity arrives, another voice may begin whispering inside your mind. It may encourage you to soften what you've just witnessed. It may invite you to convince yourself that perhaps the situation is not really as serious as it appeared. Perhaps they will eventually change. Perhaps your expectations have become unrealistic. Perhaps you are simply overanalyzing everything. That inner conflict should not automatically be mistaken for uncertainty. I believe it serves a much greater purpose. It resembles an emotional examination placed directly before your heart. First, the universe allows you to witness reality without distortion. Then, almost immediately afterward, it quietly asks a far more important question. Will you honor what you have finally seen, or will you return to the familiar comfort of an illusion simply because it feels easier than accepting the truth? That decision carries enormous significance because the story does not end there. On August 11th, Venus completes a grand air trine together with Uranus and Pluto, and the atmosphere changes once again. The lingering haze created by Neptune begins dissolving under a completely different kind of energy. Uranus introduces sudden awakening, while Pluto reinforces profound honesty. Together, they generate a surge of unmistakable clarity that cuts directly through confusion. What remains after that process is not another opinion or another emotional guess. What remains is truth in its simplest form, stripped of unnecessary decoration, impossible to deny, and surprisingly liberating once you allow yourself to embrace it. For some relationships, this period may become an undeniable turning point. It is important to acknowledge that possibility with honesty. If a connection has survived primarily because one person continued believing in imagined potential rather than observable reality, this sequence of transits may cause that emotional structure to collapse with remarkable speed. The image that once held everything together can no longer support itself once the illusion disappears. Yet that outcome is not the only possibility. Relationships built upon authenticity may experience something entirely different. Instead of breaking apart, they may become stronger than either person believed possible. Once pretense falls away, genuine intimacy has room to emerge. Conversations become more transparent. Emotional walls continue dissolving. Both people begin meeting one another as they truly are, instead of as carefully constructed versions of themselves. That kind of honesty creates a level of closeness that cannot be manufactured through romance alone. It develops when two people choose reality over fantasy, vulnerability over performance, and truth over comfort. That is the kind of connection countless people spend their entire lives hoping to discover, even if they cannot always describe exactly what they are searching for. As powerful as this emotional awakening may become, another equally fascinating transformation follows immediately afterward, and in many ways it changes not only what you feel, but also how you express those feelings. What unfolds next may reshape the very language through which your relationship grows. When I first examined this month's alignments, my attention naturally focused on the emotional intensity created by Pluto, Neptune, and the extraordinary shifts taking place within the heart. Yet the deeper I explored the chart, the more another pattern began standing out. In many respects, it may prove just as valuable for the long-term future of relationships as everything we have discussed so far. During August 11th and August 12th, Venus traveling through Libra, Uranus positioned in Gemini, and Pluto moving through Aquarius form what astrologers recognize as a grand air trine. Shortly afterward, Mercury in Leo contributes a harmonious sextile with Venus, creating a larger pattern known as a double kite configuration. Although those names may initially sound highly technical, their emotional significance is surprisingly practical once you understand what they represent. Air signs govern thought, communication, ideas, learning, curiosity, perspective, and the intellectual bridge connecting one person to another. When so much harmonious air energy becomes active at the same time, it creates extraordinary opportunities for meaningful dialogue. Subjects that previously felt impossible to discuss may suddenly become accessible. Conversations that repeatedly reached uncomfortable silence may begin flowing with unexpected ease. Feelings you struggled to express may finally find words that accurately reflect what has been living inside your heart. Because Uranus participates in this configuration, these conversations are unlikely to remain ordinary or predictable. Uranus challenges routines, interrupts familiar habits, and encourages people to question assumptions they have accepted for far too long. As a result, the discussions arising during this period may surprise both people involved. You may suddenly find yourself introducing topics you never believed you would have the courage to mention. Your partner may reveal perspectives that completely transform your understanding of the relationship. Long-term plans, shared dreams, personal expectations, or deeply personal truths may surface in ways that feel remarkably different from every conversation you have previously shared together. Adding even greater warmth to this atmosphere, Mercury in Leo encourages communication that remains heartfelt instead of emotionally distant. Rather than becoming purely intellectual discussions, these exchanges carry sincerity, courage, openness, and genuine emotional investment. They are conversations where both people feel truly heard rather than simply answered. They create the rare experience of walking away with a deeper understanding of each other's inner world than either person possessed before the discussion began. For couples willing to fully embrace this opportunity, I believe this period may become one of the most rewarding moments of the entire month. Lasting relationships are not sustained solely by attraction or chemistry, powerful as those qualities may be. Their greatest strength often comes from two people continually inspiring one another through curiosity, understanding, shared ideas, and honest communication. This remarkable sequence of planetary alignments opens that possibility with unusual strength. If your relationship has recently begun feeling repetitive, if daily routines have quietly replaced genuine connection, or if you have sensed that you are living alongside one another more than truly engaging with each other, this window offers an opportunity for meaningful renewal. The invitation is already present within the sky. The only remaining question is whether both hearts are willing to enter those conversations with openness and courage. None of what we have explored so far will create lasting change unless you are willing to do one simple but incredibly difficult thing. You have to speak the truth that has been sitting quietly inside your heart. You have to give a voice to the thoughts you have postponed, the needs you have minimized, and the emotions you have convinced yourself could wait for another day. The remarkable energy unfolding now is offering something exceptionally rare. It is creating an opportunity to rebuild the intellectual and communicative foundation of your relationship from the ground up, and opportunities like this do not appear often. If you allow fear, habit, or comfort to silence you now, this doorway may close before you fully understand what it was trying to offer. That is why I want to return to the transit I mentioned earlier, because after examining everything else happening this month, I genuinely believe this is the moment carrying the greatest weight. The alignment arriving on August 21st has the potential to reveal whether a relationship possesses the strength to endure beyond temporary emotion. Everything leading up to this point has been preparing you for this single test. The emotional adjustments, the healing brought to old wounds, the moments of uncomfortable honesty, the powerful conversations. Every one of those experiences has been gradually strengthening your awareness. Then, almost unexpectedly, the universe introduces a sequence that may initially appear harsh, although I believe it is ultimately one of the greatest acts of compassion it could possibly offer. Before the challenge arrives, there is first a beautiful gift. On August 17th, Venus forms a harmonious sextile with Jupiter in Leo. The atmosphere surrounding relationships becomes noticeably lighter. Warmth replaces tension. Optimism returns where doubt once lived. Affection feels easier to express. Generosity flows naturally. Couples may rediscover the simple joy of enjoying one another's company without carrying the emotional heaviness that defined the previous weeks. After everything you have worked through, this alignment offers a chance to breathe again. You begin recognizing the qualities that first drew you toward each other. You remember why the connection mattered in the first place. Gratitude becomes easier. Hope feels believable again. Many people may find themselves looking at their partner with renewed appreciation, recognizing possibilities they had temporarily forgotten during the more demanding emotional work of the month. It is one of the most uplifting Venus alignments of the entire year, and its warmth has the ability to open the heart in beautiful ways. Yet the story does not remain there. Only 4 days later, on August 21st, Venus moves directly into an opposition with Saturn, and the emotional atmosphere changes dramatically. Saturn stands in striking contrast to everything Jupiter represents. Where Jupiter expands, Saturn measures. Where Jupiter encourages possibility, Saturn demands proof. It has little interest in romantic excitement, hopeful imagination, or emotional idealism. Instead, Saturn quietly asks one uncompromising question. Is this relationship strong enough to endure the realities of life? That is why I believe this transit deserves such careful attention. It may become the dividing line, separating relationships capable of lasting from those sustained only by temporary momentum. My intention is not to create fear. Rather, I hope that understanding the nature of this transit allows you to move through it with greater wisdom instead of confusion. As Venus faces Saturn, love may suddenly feel heavier than it did only days before. The joyful confidence inspired by Jupiter gradually gives way to a more serious emotional climate. You may notice greater emotional distance between yourself and your partner. Interactions that recently felt effortless may suddenly require more patience. Everyday responsibilities may appear more demanding. Practical concerns begin occupying space that romance alone cannot fill. If weaknesses have been quietly developing beneath the surface, this alignment has an extraordinary ability to reveal them with unmistakable clarity. Relationships maintained through avoidance, convenience, unrealistic expectations, or fear of loneliness may discover that those hidden fractures can no longer remain concealed. Yet I do not believe this represents punishment. Instead, it resembles an architect carefully examining the strength of a foundation before allowing additional weight to rest upon it. Passion alone cannot sustain a relationship indefinitely if it collapses the moment real challenges arrive. Chemistry by itself cannot resolve difficult conversations about commitment, financial realities, shared responsibilities, or long-term direction. Saturn asks couples to place romantic fantasy aside for a moment and examine what truly exists. It encourages both people to speak honestly about where they stand today, rather than where they hope to stand someday. Can this relationship withstand ordinary life as well as extraordinary moments? Can both partners remain committed not only when everything feels exciting, but also when progress becomes slow, repetitive, and demanding? Are both individuals equally prepared to continue choosing one another when love requires discipline instead of excitement? Those questions may not feel romantic, yet they often determine whether love matures into something lasting. One pattern continues standing out whenever I examine this particular transit. Couples who meet Saturn with honesty instead of resistance frequently emerge from this period carrying a stronger bond than they possessed before. Saturn certainly examines every weakness, but it also strengthens everything capable of enduring its pressure. Commitments formed or reaffirmed beneath this influence often possess remarkable stability because they have already survived reality's most important questions. There is a profound difference between a promise made during comfort and a promise renewed after facing genuine difficulty together. The latter carries extraordinary weight because it has already been tested. At the same time, honesty requires acknowledging another possibility. Not every relationship will continue beyond this period. Some connections may naturally reach their conclusion here. If that happens, I hope you remember that an ending does not automatically represent failure. Sometimes Saturn simply reveals that your future belongs somewhere different from the place you have been trying to remain. As painful as that realization may feel, it often creates space for a healthier future than continuing a relationship that has already completed its purpose. More than anything else, this transit represents a profound turning point rather than a simple ending or beginning. When we step back and observe the entire month together, an even larger pattern becomes impossible to ignore. None of these planetary movements exist independently. They are woven together into a much greater story. On August the 12th, the same day Venus completes the grand air trine, a solar eclipse takes place in Leo. Eclipses rarely limit their influence to a single day or even a single week. Instead, they establish an energetic direction extending throughout the following 6 months. That means the romantic decisions made during this period, the conversations initiated, the commitment strengthened, and the relationships formed are unlikely to be temporary experiences. They become part of a much longer chapter that continues unfolding well beyond August itself. Then, as the month approaches its conclusion, another powerful moment arrives. On August 28th, a lunar eclipse in Pisces introduces an immense emotional release. Everything that has accumulated throughout the month, every difficult realization, every uncomfortable truth, every emotional burden, finally reaches a point where it can begin dissolving. This becomes the space where old resentment loses its grip. Long-carried grief begins softening. Attachments to outdated ideas of love gradually fall away. You release not only painful memories, but also unrealistic expectations about relationships that were never truly aligned with your authentic needs. Between these two eclipses, another significant collective shift unfolds as the lunar nodes move into an entirely new Pisces and Virgo axis. This transition gently redirects the collective emotional focus toward greater compassion, deeper empathy, and a more spiritually centered understanding of love. The tendency to overanalyze every emotion, to control every outcome, or to believe every relationship can be repaired through constant effort is gradually being left behind. In its place emerges an invitation towards something gentler, more emotionally honest, and ultimately more sustainable. Love no longer needs flawless appearances to possess genuine value. It simply needs authenticity. Looking at everything together, I truly believe August 2026 will become one of those rare periods people remember long after it has passed. Not because circumstances were imposed upon them against their will, but because the universe offered extraordinary clarity, remarkable courage, and meaningful cosmic support at precisely the moment they were finally ready to choose the kind of love that genuinely reflects their worth. If you have accepted less than you deserve, if you have exhausted yourself through endless giving, if you have remained attached to an illusion instead of embracing reality, or if you have continued avoiding the conversations your heart has been asking you to have, this month offers a meaningful invitation to choose differently. That invitation may not always feel comfortable, but perhaps comfort is no longer what your soul truly needs. Perhaps what you are ready for now is truth. Before we finish, I want to sincerely thank you for staying with me throughout this entire journey. I know this has been a longer exploration than usual, and I genuinely appreciate every moment you have shared here. If these insights have spoken to you, and you would like to continue exploring future astrological movements together, I would be deeply grateful if you chose to subscribe. Your support makes it possible for these conversations to continue reaching people who may need them. I would also truly love to hear your own experience. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what has already begun shifting inside your life. What emotions have been surfacing as you move into today? I read every message because I believe there is something profoundly meaningful about witnessing these collective transformations together. Until next time, be gentle with yourself, trust the process unfolding before you, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.